Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Sustainable Living Series webinar. Today we have Ange DeFossi, owner and operator of Harlow Green, a local bulk refillery. Ange is going to be talking about the mindset changes that are required for long-term individual approaches to sustainability in the home, in personal care products, and in our individual contexts within our consumer-driven society. Very interesting. Without further ado, please welcome Ange DeFossi.
Hey everybody, I'm Ange. Just wanted to say before I get started with talking about some mindset shifts, wanted to thank Queens for inviting me to do this today. I'm excited to talk about this. I could talk forever about it, so I'm going to try and just keep a handle on my rambling with the topic. So we'll get started, but I thought I would first, how do I go to the next one? Tell you a little bit about the business and myself so that you know kind of what is guiding my perspective in this and where I'm coming from and how long I've been working on this. So I'm a mom of two boys and I grew up on a farm. So my perspective is very kind of steeped in growing up living with the environment, but in a very different way than I am now. And I went to the University of Guelph. I studied English and the environment. And that was between 2005 to 2009. So it's really interesting getting back into the topic at this age. I'm 35 now. And when I was in classes at Guelph, we were talking about these huge environmental impacts that were coming our way if things weren't changing. And that we had timelines like 10 years, 15 years. And it's interesting that now that's where we're sitting. And the conversation has kind of ramped up a lot. But at the time, there was no real way for any of the students sitting in the class to really understand how we were supposed to shift to a different way of living. We grew up in a completely different culture than our grandparents did, and or at least I, had no idea how to make changes myself. So I'll talk a little bit about that and some anecdotes to kind of hopefully illuminate some of the shifts that I went through. But I love talking about this stuff. It's a big part of my business. I have a blog and I love talking on social media. I try to talk about the things in our store, but I generally am just talking about all of these different sustainability issues all of the time that come up in the store and with our staff. I just love speaking on the topic. But I used to teach and then took some time when my boys were really young as a business operations manager. And that ended up being this in-between thing that laid the foundation for me to have my own business. So the first lockdown started and I had to decide if I was going to kind of let go of all the progress I'd made and just order everything online, or if I was going to start something myself. And it really started in just my mudroom and then really quickly evolved to being a part of local markets and speaking to different producers there and finding local makers and just kind of going on this weird little journey, which I know millennials love to call things journeys. So I'm going to call it that a lot today. But if you're interested in seeing or learning some more, I'm going to try and save the webinar today onto our website. But we also have, or I did a webinar last year for Sustainable Kingston. So I talk a little bit, I touch on some of the things today about how to shift your mindset from eco-friendly to sustainable, or like understanding what sustainability is. So if you're curious, you can watch that on YouTube as well. And just to give you a little overview of what I'm going to be chatting about today, I broke it down into 3 main shifts, but each one, like, if you're anywhere into the sustainability sphere, it's like this tangled web, it's intersectional, and there are all these other inequalities happening, and there's so many details to kind of tease apart that it's almost impossible. So in each shift, I hate to like speak about it really quickly, but it is a long-term thing. And each one has all of these different layers. It's almost like peeling an onion back, and finding new things as you go, which I find really interesting. And I love talking about this stuff, but it's going to be a lot, because it is a long-term thing. I'm going to talk about how to kind of set your expectations. And then I'm going to touch a little bit on the eco-friendly to sustainable shift in trying to make decisions, because we're always consuming. It's not something we're going to just move away from. It's not about just switching to buying the right things and then you're just good to go. That's not what it is at all. So how you can shift your decision making, the perspective that you have in approaching it. And then the third thing I want to talk about is this huge topic of addressing some of the social narratives or the consumer cycles and things that happen in our society, and how ingrained they are on the personal level. So this is all kind of focused on the individual. I know that individual action is really important, but I want to say just at the beginning of this that it can't just be individual. There are some huge forces at play here and really big systems that have a lot of responsibility in it. So that's just something, I guess, that I wanted to put into the context before we get into it, that it's not all on the individual. And then hopefully answer some questions. I'm going to try and keep an eye on the time so that I can answer a few. So the first shift that I think that has to happen is shifting from this, like, right now we got to do everything today, and this sort of perfection mindset, to a long-term change. So I've seen so many people, and I've recognized in myself as well. You see a documentary and you're all fired up, or there's something released in the media. Like I remember earlier this year when they released that microplastics are now being found in blood. And then last year they were finding it in placenta. And when that first statistic came out, we had people it was the one thing that kind of set them off, and they were ready to change everything. Or I'm seeing a lot of people say to me, January is when I'm going to do it. I'm going to become sustainable. We're going to switch over everything. And I think it's human nature to get excited and to want to make these grand, huge changes. But I find that it's actually a lot more beneficial to see this as this is the rest of my life and I am changing for the long term. So just like anything else that we want to change for the long term, you are going to have failures. There will be setbacks. There will be times where you kind of go backwards, but then you come back to the path. So I think it's really important to put that out there. We also, interestingly enough, in the shop and just in general in meeting people at markets, environmentalism it's tied up with all these other issues, and it's political and can be very polarizing. So we also see a lot of people who are looking for sort of that reason to not get on board with making any changes. So it's almost like the mindset that, well, if you're going to start refilling, you have to have an electric car, you have to be refilling all your food, and you need to be making all your own linen clothing. And I think that, combined with the messages that we're getting a lot from the media, that we only have this much time to make these huge changes, I think it really has a lot of people feeling overwhelmed by even getting started. And I know what that's like. I would love to become a better baker, for example, but thinking about actually trying to make my own bread all of the time is overwhelming to me. But if I just start one little piece, it's probably not, I just need to take the pressure off. So I think the first shift that needs to happen is people need to see it more of a long-term change. It doesn't have to be perfect. I put the example of corporations on here. When you see like their plans for long-term change, there's some goals in there, there's some endpoints, they expect challenges, and it kind of pulls the emotion out of it a little bit of this is my failure personally. So I think that's the first piece that I want to put out there. And I'm always advocating for suggesting like do one thing at a time. It's a lot more realistic, and understanding where you're at when you're going to make that change helps you sort of move into it. So here's essentially the shift that has to happen in the mind or cognitively for us to be able to go from where we're at right now, or where I for sure used to be, to where I'm still working on trying to attain myself. So over here we have convenience living. Your decision making is just, what do I need in this minute? I'm not thinking about any sort of ramifications of whether I can afford this, whether I actually need it, if there was something else I already had. It's really, a lot of it is driven by emotion and what I need in that minute, what I'm feeling like. But these things tend to be connected to some of our habits. So, for example, when I was in school, I was going out for breakfast and just getting my meal at the place that was closest to my classes. So I would go and I would get my coffee there and a bagel, and I did that almost every single day without considering, is there somewhere else that's right nearby here that I could be getting my food in a way where I don't have as much waste? Or could I just make this food at home? It probably would have saved me a lot of money. But convenience and not really thinking about those pieces sort of drove my decision making at the time. And then where we ideally want to be, way over here, is our decisions are in control. We're not being manipulated. We can kind of see the pushes that exist to get us to spend money, to overconsume, to buy things we don't need, to get things that are new when we may already have a great option. And we're considering sort of all these pieces of where it came from and where it's going. And we have the habits already formed. In the middle here, there is what I'm just going to call the work. And there's internal work where you kind of have to figure out these ingrained consumer behaviors, but then there's also the external work of trying to figure out these new habits and how to do them and how to learn how to do them. And it's a very long ongoing thing. So I think I'm saying all this and trying to show it to have people see that there's a mindset change. There's some internal work that has to happen. It's not simple. You're going to fail, and it does require sort of getting back on the horse. So the first thing I want to mention is setting expectations. So expect that there will be personal life setbacks that are going to make it very difficult for you to stay on this path. And I try to find this line here showing that even with setbacks, point B is still up here where point A is down here. So you can have a side step or a back step, but the idea of resilience is kind of getting back to it. So if I could look at my own journey, I would say that there are definitely periods for every single person where we go through some instability. There are a lot of people who are experiencing incredibly stressful periods right now. There's transitions happening where people are trying to work or they've lost their job. There's mental health challenges happening all the time. And then there are situations that are just systemically not fair happening to other pockets of society and all around us. So we have to remember that we need to do what we can do. And the example that I have here, this is my youngest. If there are any parents watching this, they will know that we have had the most trying year for continued illness of our little ones. They just keep getting sick and over and over. And for me, as an entrepreneur, I have a very busy period that I'm in right now, and taking time away is very difficult. So I had made all this progress in the summertime where I was very clear about where all of my food was coming from, and I could understand progress that I had made in either my packaging or the type of food that I was sourcing. But then my children got sick, and they stayed sick, it felt like, for months, and that all went away. And it's hard not to feel like you are personally failing. But now this was just a picture of us finally back doing some of the shopping in a way that I had really been trying to change some of my habits over to. So we have to see it as just a short-term back step, and to expect that those things will happen, because that is just our lives. But then we also have to set expectations for larger external setbacks. So I've had so many conversations in the shop of people who feel like they will read something and it really derails everything that they're working on. For example, the one that I heard this week was hearing another thing about Elon Musk going up to space, and how all of the efforts that they had made and all of the people that around them making all these changes, trying to spend more money in specific areas or spend more effort in specific areas to limit their impact, they felt like it was all erased just because of what some billionaires are doing in our society. And for me, sitting in my classes at Guelph, they talked and spoke a lot about how storms would become more severe, more frequent, more unpredictable, very dangerous. And then when the derecho happened this spring, I had what felt like a huge setback in feeling like there was much of a future for my kids. I went down sort of a huge derailment from what I was doing. And I know I had a lot of people in the shop feeling very unmotivated, because so few people in our country or in our community and in Ontario got out to vote on election day. So it was a crushing feeling of apathy. So I think we need to remember that these setbacks are going to come. It's not a simple thing, and the further you get into it, the more invested you become. So setting your expectations at the beginning for these failures, I think, is essential. And then another setting expectations piece that I wanted to chat about before I kind of give like a bright light of what you can do to kind of manage these expectations is understanding what type of change you're ready for before you try to make it. So I talk a lot I guess, just in general in my stories on Instagram and in my blog about simple swaps compared to major lifestyle changes or habit changes. So a simple swap is something that you don't have to think about very much. If you are in a period where, say, you're doing exams, or you know this is your really busy period for work, or it's Christmas time and you have all of these other obligations and events that you're a part of, it might not be the best time to make a habit change, but maybe in a month from now, that's something that you can manage or handle. So a simple swap would be something like, so I put a couple examples here where you're just thinking about figuring out a better option, and maybe all you have to do is choose to buy it maybe somewhere in your community where you know there's a lower carbon footprint than ordering it online, and you just include that in your day. Or maybe when you are getting your lunch, you choose a can instead of a plastic bottled drink, because that material can be recycled infinitely, whereas the plastic one probably isn't going to go anywhere except for into the trash and end up in our environment for a very long period of time. So I even put like a toothbrush. If you switch to a degradable toothbrush, it's not like you have to learn how to brush your teeth in a new way. You don't have to learn how to drink in a new way with a can. choosing a cotton swab that has a wood stick so that it can fully degrade. These are really simple things that you just have to make a decision at the beginning, like what am I going to choose? And then where am I going to put it when I'm done with it? And if you are not in a place where you can make larger lifestyle and habit changes, these simple swaps are a very good way to experience, I guess, some more positive feelings so that you feel like you're moving forward. And I think that's honestly where a lot of people should start. Getting rid of everything you own to buy new toothbrushes and cotton swabs isn't really sustainable. But as things run out and you have the opportunity to make a new choice, try making a few new choices and see where sort of that gets you, and the ball will start rolling, motivation wise. However, with lifestyle and habit changes, you kind of have to go at it understanding that you need some grace in this. You are probably unlearning a habit you have been doing sometimes for decades, and you haven't had the chance quite often to know how to do it in a new way, or you didn't do it in the home you were growing up in. So a couple examples that I have taking a reusable cup. That isn't as simple as just getting the reusable cup. You have to remember to wash it. You have to put it back in your bag. You have to remember to get it out when you're getting a drink, when you're out and about. It's not as simple. It is something that takes time to put into your life. Same thing with switching away paper towels. Not only are you having to get rid of a habit that you probably reached for paper towels without thinking for so long, that the way I learned that I had to switch these types of things, I had to take it down and put it in my basement so that it would be harder for me to do my old habit than it would be to do my new habit. But even still, I had grandparents that used rags, but I had no idea how to set it up in my home. And a lot of rags ended up being moldy before I realized I probably needed some more airflow, and I got a wire basket to keep them in so that they could dry. But then I still also had to remember on laundry day to change the habit of going to get that bin. So it's a lot harder to change some of those habits, and you need to be cognizant of yourself and where you're at so that you don't sort of set yourself up for failure. So I think in setting these expectations, it's really important to have sort of these two pieces so that you can come back to them, or you can have a long-term motivation. So it's some assistance to kind of keep you on track long term. And the pictures here are my boys. This is us. My oldest is stringing some popcorn for some garland, which I know is something that my grandparents did. But for me, even learning to pop popcorn in a pot on the stove instead of pulling out a plastic like bag and doing it in the microwave, that's new for me. So this was us learning something that now I know my sons will know how to do. It won't be as tough for them. And then these are the girls in the shop. I think it is really important to not be trying to do this in a silo. You need to find a community. You need to find other people that are doing this so that you can talk about these things. It keeps you on track. It keeps you moving forward. And before I had my shop and was doing all of this, I was working by myself, but I used Instagram. So if you're watching this from a place that doesn't have a community or like a club that you could go join, or somebody that you know that is also interested in it, I found people that could expand what I realized was possible. And I started following them and just seeing what they were doing. Unfortunately, at the time, it was mostly in Europe, so it felt really inaccessible to me to be able to go to a package-free shop, and I couldn't bike to where I wanted to go, and I wasn't living in a city, and I had kids. And so that there were some other pieces that I really did need a community for, but I could find different people around the world doing these things in their homes, and it really helped me on my own journey. So finding other people that you can share the journey with is really important for resilience. So on to the next shift, understanding that it's a long-term shift. You do need to learn how to change your decision-making. And I talked a little bit about this today and had a few amazing responses on my social media stories of people who have a set of questions before they buy things that helps them make decisions in the moment. And I think that's generally what's going on with me as well. I used to really be into decluttering and getting rid of things. I wanted this calm home, but until I sort of started changing how I was thinking about the actual consumption part, I could have been decluttering and going through this same cycle for the rest of my life and not actually changing what was coming in. So we have to shift our mindset to understanding the life cycle of an item, and the birth and the death, I like to say. And that does take some time to sort of understand sort of all the elements. And I think for some people, this feels really overwhelming. Marketing is designed for us to not be able to understand these things clearly, or they may focus on like the birth piece over here and the use piece, but not the actual death of the item. So we can have setbacks for sure, but I think being open to learning as you go turns this into more of a tool or a shift in your perspective just overall, because it has affected, I may have started with my cleaning supplies, but now it affects almost everything that I'm consuming. So it's hard to learn and start changing your perspective and go backwards. So I think it's a hard shift to make, but it's generally a very important one. So firstly, I popped up here the hierarchy of need. It's based on Maslow's hierarchy of need. It's just been reimagined in the context of consumption. So we're shifting to buying and consuming brand new resources last. So it's our last resort. It's the thing that we are doing the least. And these pieces here are definitely a shift. It was not something that my family ever did. We bought new everything, and it was almost like buying something thrifted or swapping with somebody or making it was, I don't want to say beneath us, but it was almost, my parents would always say, well, we don't need to do that. But really, we all need to be doing it. So using what you already have is essential. So questions that might come up is, do I already have this? And it's funny when you get into using up what you already have, you notice how much sales have an impact over you. So I had probably 2 years worth of toothpaste before I needed, from when I made my commitment to choose something different when I ran out to when I actually did run out. So using up what you have is essential. Swapping and borrowing is great. Asking yourself if you actually need this to own it, to possess it, or if you could just borrow it for the short term. Swapping is another good one that you can do with clothing, especially if you are into fashion. That's a great way to get some variety. Same thing with thrifting and making. So before, I would have, if my son needed a new pair of skates, I would have immediately tried to find something on sale to save money, where now I'm looking at it as, do we really need this fresh, like produced resource, or can I find something that already exists and use that and give it a longer life cycle? So shifting to buying as a last resort will hopefully help us decrease our consumption. Oh, my picture here is not working, but it is peaches in a plastic grocery produce bag. So I have quite a few examples of this in that other webinar that I mentioned, but I thought I would just quickly touch on it here. So eco-friendly essentially it means nothing. It is a fantastic marketing term, and you need to start asking questions if that's the only way it's being labeled. But basically, it's describing anything that is just better than the least than the worst option. So over here, I had my peaches in a plastic produce bag. That would be the worst option. You're grabbing a fresh bit of plastic every single time you go to the grocery store. It's a single-use thing. It's only used for maximum like a week, and then it is tossed, and it is always going to be plastic waste. Moving over here to our eco-friendly option, it is still plastic. So you go to the grocery store and you see those sets of reusable produce bags, and they're usually very cheap. And then you look at them and they say that they're polyester. So they're still coming from fossil fuels. It's still plastic. When you're washing it, it's releasing microplastics into the water system. And then when you're done with it, if it breaks, it is still just plastic mesh. So it's least worse in the sense that you are going to be using it more than one time, but it's definitely not a sustainable route. So sustainability, taken away from environmental context, the green context, it just means a cycle that can go on and on infinitely without breaking down. So in the case of the other two, we are going to accumulate a lot of impacts. We have the waste at the end piece of it here that is going to cause a breakdown in the system somewhere. So we have an accumulation, it's not being thought of, and it's not ideal. So it has impacts. So the picture that I picked here, it does look brand new, but if you choose something that is a degradable fabric, you're thinking about the death of the item. So what's going to happen to it when I'm done with it? If I use this thing all the way until it cannot be used anymore, what will happen to it? And if you're choosing a degradable fabric, so maybe it's cotton, maybe it's hemp or linen, it will degrade hopefully on its own. And that means that the cycle can go on and on. And at the beginning of this cycle, I would say it's even more sustainable. Those look brand new if you used a fabric or a textile that already exists, so that you're using resources instead of grabbing some new ones. But thinking about how there might be dye added in the process. There are a lot of elements that can go into fabric being sustainable or not being sustainable. So it essentially comes down to shifting to thinking a lot about how you're going to choose. So the shift goes to not just how you use it, like how am I going to use this? How does it solve a problem for me in my everyday life? But you're going to start thinking about, where was this made? Was this made on the other side of the world and has the huge carbon footprint of getting to me? Were the people who were making it fairly paid? Is the processing safe? And what was the impact of this processing? And then we will also start thinking about the death. And really the simplest question to ask yourself is, will this degrade? And then if you're not really at the point of throwing it out, so maybe you're getting skates, like that example, I'd be thinking about, who could use this after me? Am I getting a good option here so that I know it will last and last for as many uses as I can choose? Or am I choosing something like fast fashion that is not going to be used for very long? So it's a shift to thinking about all of these things. And this is a really full slide. I'm not going to go through all of this, but this is where intersectionality joins the conversation. So if we're thinking about where something came from, we're starting to think about the working conditions, fair wages. And if we're buying it from a physical store that is close by us, that's a lot lessened carbon footprint than ordering online, because every time a person orders one thing, that is a carbon footprint for just getting that order to you instead of going and finding it somewhere nearby. So really, sustainability helps you to think about and focusing on more community-based solutions and solutions that are found within our own area. And we begin thinking about sort of all those entwined inequalities and injustices that come up with climate change, especially down here in the death section. People in marginalized communities have higher rates of toxins in their environments and where they live, just because of where our waste ends up. It's a social equity issue. So thinking about future generations also brings up that empathy piece where you are planning just outside of yourself and what you personally need. So the further you go with it, your decision making is going to evolve. It's an imperfect process. Like even with our shop, we had some on-paper towels in our store at the beginning of the year. And as I've been learning more about how fabric is produced, now we have versions that aren't dyed industrially, and we have some organic cotton options because I've learned, a little bit more about that, and my decision making is evolving. And as we are able to source things closer and closer to us for things people are looking for, then it evolves. And that's okay. That is really where we need to be sitting with it. It's not perfect. And the final shift, a huge topic, is addressing some long-term consumer cycles. So the unconscious or perfect consumer, the sleepy consumer, you're really not thinking about things other than like, ooh, I want that right now. Here's my money. And reflecting on sort of all the psychology that is behind this, it is a hugely, it's an expensive thing. So big companies have marketing teams. Even just the idea of where the cart is placed on the screen has been researched. I was looking at the Journal of Consumer Behavior today, and they were talking about how you probably saw some of these on Black Friday, just the tiered spending. If you spend $100, save 10%. If you spend $150, save 15%, and really how to set it up so that consumers will actually pull the trigger on spending. So this was just the new research that is out there. So I think there is a lot of money spent and a lot of focus put on this research for being able to get you to spend. But then this research isn't actually being shifted the other way for people to understand how they're really being manipulated and spending money that maybe they don't want to be spending. So how to sort of shift those things, it's a huge thing. It's a lot of work. And honestly, I'm still struggling with it myself. We felt a huge crush just with Black Friday about a week ago. So it's a huge topic, and again, a long-term change. So I got this quote. I was reflecting on it yesterday. It's by Rachel Carson, and she is the author of Silent Spring, which is from the 60s, a book that sort of started help the environmental movement get started and protecting spaces, that whole movement get started. But I thought it was really applicable to this specific sort of piece of talking about changing our mindset. And it is, we are challenged as mankind has never been challenged before to prove our maturity and our mastery, not of nature, but of ourselves. So if we are going to go to war with nature, we are really harming our own selves, but it is ourselves that is creating this war with nature. So getting a grip and getting a handle on these things is going to be challenging because so much of our society needs us to be spending money, and we're really not set up for people to not be consuming. So I have a little anecdote here to talk a little bit about the psychology of consumption, but again, it's not designed for you to be in control. And delving into my own emotional patterns and spending at places that I was out of control was really illuminating, and it took me a really long time to get a grip on it. So if you have been in Winners or Marshalls or a store like that, you will notice, I had to make this picture because I didn't get a chance to go out and get a picture of it, how many coffee cups are just discarded all through the store. And it is a long-term thing. I have seen it for years. And the more that like you reflect on it, you can see that their demographic is a slice of women between certain ages that generally go there. And if you are following any sort of millennial account online or watching reels. There are a ton of reels talking about how funny this is, but not as many talking about sort of the underlying problem here, that we all like to go and get like our fancy drink, and then we go peruse Winners and Marshalls, and we find things that we didn't know we needed, that we didn't go in for, and somehow feel better. And it really is a short-lived feel better, because then we have professional organizers and then decluttering and minimalism articles and blogs to help us get rid of that stuff. So if you're walking through Winners, and I used to do this all of the time, I did it with my friends. I used to do it when I first became a teacher. I was waitressing at the same time, and I spent all of my tips. I would go to Winners, and I was missing my partner at the time and kind of sad that we weren't able to live in the same city, and was kind of just thinking about how much I missed him and where maybe we would live someday. And I spent all of that money on buying a fancy drink and buying things for a future home. And I don't have a single one of those things like in my life today. And now I also don't have any of that money. So I think there is a target audience there of people trying to manage their stress. It's a socially acceptable way to manage your stress. It's a funny like way to make a reel about it, and we'll share it with other women doing the exact same thing, rather than looking at like what the underlying problem is here and taking, I guess, our control back. So here's a couple of quotes that illuminate the emotional overspending or our sleepiness. So the largest percentage of respondents to admit to emotional overspending are millennials at 67%. So that's most of us. And 49% of Americans admit that emotions have caused them to spend more than they can reasonably afford. So it's not helping. In 2021, Canadians admitted to navigating the pandemic with spending to feel good. I admit to this. I think a lot of people can think back to specific purchases that happened to help them through a difficult time. And then the whole concept of a microwave culture is we need to have what we want when we want it, and we're not thinking about it. We're not taking time. If we can get it shipped to us very quickly, then we want it as soon as we can get it. And then also this throwaway mindset and culture that it doesn't matter if it's not very good, because you're going to be going out and getting another outfit very quickly afterwards. So both of these pieces or underlying discourses and feelings that we have in our society are really pushing us to overspend. And then I also wanted to kind of give the flip side of that. The United Nations environmental goal number 12 is requiring consumers to rethink their individual consumption. So trying to shift it to sustainable consumption patterns and to consuming less and to think about these impacts, but nothing in our society is letting us do that. In fact, it's like a fight to have us be the other way. But we know that overconsumption is a key cause of global climate change. And this is a new study that I have been seeing a lot of environmental groups sharing in the last week or so. On the eve of Black Friday, this report came out showing that 80% of the items bought are thrown out after just a few uses or even 0 uses, because people are thinking, well, I might as well buy it because it's such a good deal, and not really considering whether they need it. So there's 2 pieces here. We have the society that is pushing us to keep over-consuming, and then the other piece where we're starting to understand that. But even myself, when I was starting to learn a bit more about this, I would go onto my social media, and within a little bit of time, I may have clicked on an image of somebody that I really admire. It could be a friend. It could be one of the people that I was talking about that I was getting some inspiration from, and click over to a business. And then all of a sudden I have been on there for 20 minutes looking at what they have for sale and have a cart with like 6 things in it before I had that moment of, what am I doing? I don't even know what the path was here that got me to this space. So there is a huge market for your triggers and triggers for spending. Until we understand our own triggers and are able to manage them differently, we may just continue on the same path. And that really was happening to me. And what it meant was, when I would get these purchases, I would then return them and have that time where I would be guilty and feeling badly about it. But I had to have grace and remember that this is bigger than myself, because marketing teams are aware of what your triggers might be, and they use them strategically to get people to spend. So I have a few on there. Everybody will have something different that they are relating to. And unfortunately, it translates into some of the ways that we are spending. So some strategies for kind of getting started on the work here. I have a list over here of some patterns, and I know it's very limited compared to what it could be. There are a number of patterns, but I picked some that directly related to my own journey with this. So buying directly after you receive a paycheck, and I'm not talking about paying a bill that you need to pay. It is going out shopping because you know you've gotten paid, or going shopping without a plan of what you're going to get, knowing that you have money to spend, and that it's just there. Indulging in immediate gratification, so buying things that maybe you didn't need, rationalizing it with "I deserve it" or "I need this," and then looking around your own home and seeing how many unused items there are. If you look in your closets, you can probably see a pattern. If you are decluttering or you're looking at what you own that you don't use, you can see areas that maybe you need to think about why you continuously spend in that area. Shopping when stressed or even for fun without a plan. So these types of patterns are problematic, and they're probably connected to a something else. So some strategies for getting started with the work. A wait period. I love these. If you see something that you think that you need, give yourself whatever you think. At the beginning, I did a week for my wait periods, and I generally realized a week later that I didn't really want it that badly. It was an in the moment thing. It would be because I was excited about the new season, or I had seen somebody recently wearing a similar sweater, and I just wanted that feeling of coziness. Generally, I figure out that I don't need it. I might already have something. I can get it from somewhere else. I can thrift it. A wait period is fantastic for helping you to think it through. Identifying a need before you go shopping. So not just shopping just because, figuring out like, I need skates, for example, before I'm going to go enter that sports store. Looking for areas of overspending. I used to go to Costco and overspend all of the time, and I thought I was saving money, but until I got rid of my membership, I didn't realize how many things I was buying that I didn't really need and saw in the moment. Replacing your coping strategies. So finding a different hobby that is way less destructive and probably helps you recharge in a much better way. One in, one out, a replacement mindset. So you see a coat on sale and you're like, wow, that's great, a great deal. I really love it. I put it on, but then think to yourself, am I really going to get rid of the winter coat that I already have to replace it? And generally the answer is no. A full price check-in. If you would not spend the full price on it, you are probably being pressured to buy it just because it's on sale. Expecting failures, but aiming for long-term improvements. So as I mentioned, I had a lot of fails in this area before I really made some progress. And then tracking your successes. So I have seen some budgeting ladies do this awesome activity where maybe they're trying not to buy anything new for a month, and then they write down all of the things that they wanted to buy, but that they didn't. And at the end of the month, they could say, wow, I saved $700. And that success helps build trust in yourself and feel like you are making better decisions and you're moving forward. And honestly, it feels so much better than any like amount of impulse buys are going to make you feel at the end of the month. So takeaways from the whole presentation. I know I kind of rambled there. There was a lot of info. I glossed over mindset changes that take a long time to shift. But as I said at the beginning, you have to remember that you are in a larger context of a society that doesn't want you to succeed at this. And so you have to find ways to stay the path, find people that are inspiring you, and to help you keep going. And remember that it's not a perfect thing. You are always going to be learning more. We are always going to be learning better ways of doing things, and we need to be open to them. And then finally, individuals, you can't solve this on your own, but every action has a ripple effect. It's incredible who's watching you, who is taking away something from what you're doing. And after a few years, you have no idea what impact you could have. And really, the wave is kind of happening in society right now. And you have to know that there are so many other people out there working on the same things as you. And I also wanted to just put in there at the end that voting and taking part in collective action is just as important as these individual things that we're all working on, because they will help make systemic change happen that needs to happen. So, whoops, I'm going backwards. I think that's the end of my presentation. Just want to say thanks again. Have a couple minutes for some questions, if there ended up being any, Marlo.
Thank you. That was excellent. That was really great. Check the chat. I'm not seeing any so far. Can wait a minute. Will you share the slide deck?
The slide deck. If I can figure out how to do that, I will be happy to. I think this is recorded too, and I'm aiming to get the link from Marlo at the end of this, and then I'll put it on our website as well.